getting...
You can't always.
This is the death.
Remarkably empty.
Turn back towards God. Rise up.
Hi, I'm Amy Cattapan. Welcome to Book.Ed. Today we are joined by Catholic author and speaker Mary Lenaburg. Mary has contributed to meditation books and scripture studies and has heard on numerous Catholic radio shows and podcasts. Mary and her husband Jerry live in Virginia with their son Jonathan. Their daughter Courtney passed away in 2014. In her new book, Be Brave in the Scared, How I Learned to Trust God During the Most Difficult Days of My Life, Mary shares how the overwhelming demands of caring for her severely disabled daughter ultimately taught her that trusting in God and accepting His will can lead to profound joy. Mary, welcome to Book.Ed.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. It's a joy to be here.
I am so excited. I've been waiting months to do this interview with you because I've followed you on Instagram for a long time, and I've always loved your authenticity, your sense of humor, your deep love for Jesus, and your trust in God. But trusting God in difficult times can be hard. So let's start with your beloved daughter, Courtney, and how these were the most difficult days of your life.
Well, when Courtney was born in 1992, everything was fine, and it was the day of her baptism that she had her first seizure. And what we thought would be sort of a temporary thing, like maybe she had meningitis or there might have been some underlying medical issue, turned out to be 22 years of daily seizures, grand mal seizures where she would stop breathing. It turned into a lifestyle that I wasn't prepared for. And so when I say that they were the most difficult days of my life, I mean that in that physically, it was very demanding to care for a child who couldn't walk, couldn't talk, was wheelchair bound. Mentally, it was exhausting keeping everything in play with her physicians, her therapists. Emotionally, it was hard. We made decisions as far as her healthcare was concerned, I talk about in the book, where she had an allergic reaction to a medication, which took her sight and severely damaged her brain. So you're dealing with the guilt of all of that. My marriage, anything, we call Courtney our earthquake. So if you think of what an earthquake does to a newly paved road, it's smooth and happy and you're traveling along and then an earthquake comes and the sewage line breaks and the asphalt cracks and everything comes bubbling to the surface. And so that's what we talk about in the book. Everything that you would shove aside and not think about and say, I can't handle that right now. We've got to deal with this immediate medical crisis. There came points where we couldn't put it away anymore. We had to deal with it. And so that's why it was so hard, because you're not just dealing with the life of a disabled child, you're dealing with a broken marriage. You're dealing with a perfectly able child who doesn't have your time or attention. And you're dealing with my own issues, my own emotional issues. We talk about addiction in the book, mine to food, my husband's to pornography, just a lot of things. It's a very broken time in my life.
Yeah, very challenging on the whole family. In the middle of the book, you talk about sort of a turning point for you and for your family, which was this trip to Lourdes. Tell us about this trip to Lourdes with the Order of Malta.
Well, we had the opportunity. Courtney was 7 years old. We were homeschooling at the time, and another homeschooling family told us about the Knights and Dames of Malta. And so on a fluke, I said, oh, we'll go, we'll see. They're probably going to deny us because she was profoundly disabled. And that's not easy to travel with a child like Courtney. So we had a suction machine and a wheelchair and all of these pieces of equipment besides her. And it was a trip we just couldn't afford. So we filled out the application, went in for the interview, and they told us in the interview, oh, yes, we're taking you. And so it was, my first international travel. I was so excited to be in the airport at Paris, France, because it was in Paris, France. And I was like, I'm in Paris for 2 hours. And then we show up at Lourdes, and Lourdes was transformational in that it is a place of healing. It's a place of miracles. And you go with an open heart and an open mind to whatever God and Our Lady have in store for you. And so my husband was newly converted to the faith. He had been a Catholic for a year at that point. Courtney was stable in her health. Our son was back home with my parents, so that we can concentrate totally on Courtney's care. And we had an experience in the water, which was profound for us.
Talk a little bit about the water. For somebody who might not know about Lourdes, what is the attraction? Why do people bring their sick to Lourdes?
St. Bernadette, of course, I think it was 1858, she had an apparition. She saw the Blessed Mother who said, dig here, for these healing waters that bubbled up. And you can see where she dug even to this day. And there are crutches and things that are hanging there from the very first miracles that took place at that time. And it is known as a place of healing. What our Knights and Dames told us was a lot of healing begins there. So you step into this bath. It's about 6 feet long, a stone kind of bath with the coldest water on the planet.
I've been in it. I can attest. It is extremely cold water.
And I think God makes it cold because He wants you to be totally attentive to what He has to say for you. And so you go into the water completely as you came into the world, which I was unexpected for me to be wrapped in a cold sheet with nothing else on me. Sounds a little crazy and wackadoodle, but there are reasons so that the water can touch all parts of your body for healing. And our daughter went into the water first on a stretcher, covered, and she had an experience where we heard the word acceptance when we were praying. They asked what my prayer was, and I heard a young woman's voice just whisper, acceptance. And I thought it was Our Lady. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've had this beautiful moment with Our Lady. And then we come out of the water and we get dressed and we go out of the baths. And my husband is waiting for us. And I looked at him and I had just told him my experience. And he said, Mary, what was the word you heard? And I said, acceptance. And he said, I heard a young woman's voice say acceptance. And we thought we were both just having kind of an emotional breakdown. And I said, we can't be those weird people that say, I heard the voice of the Lord. Right. I just felt so uncomfortable with that knowledge. That's a beautiful story we tell in the book. But we came home and it took 4 years for us to understand one of the prayers. We had 2 prayers for our daughter throughout her life. The first one was that we would hear her authentic voice because she sounded a lot like Chewbacca from Star Wars. This is how she sort of talked to us with that voice. And she never passed 7 to 9 months in development. So she was a 5'8" baby. And the second prayer was that we would be with her when she took her last breath. And with that first one, we were in the hospital room and she was having surgery. And I was reading some notes from a recent retreat. And I realized that the voice we heard was not Our Lady, but it was our daughter, Courtney. And that she had accepted this path that God had laid out for her. And that her dad and her mom and her big brother needed to get with it and get with it quick because we were her arms and her legs out to the world. And what Lourdes did was change our perspective completely on how we saw our mission with our daughter and that our daughter understood her mission and that it was uniquely hers. We are each given a mission that only we can do. I can't do your mission. You can't do mine. It is given just for us. It's as unique as our fingerprint. And so she needed help doing hers and we were her hands and her feet. And so it changed us. Didn't change Courtney. Courtney was just Courtney. We learned to love her and respect the dignity of her humanness. She showed us how God loves us.
I love that Lourdes story, having been to Lourdes and knowing other people who have been there and the miracles that come out of it. Like you said, as the Order of Malta told you, it sometimes happens later on. I'd like to talk about grief for a bit because there's a lot of talk about how we deal with grief in the book. One of my favorite parts is in chapter 11. And you say, what makes grief so difficult is that it doesn't really end. And I don't think it was till the passing of my own mother about 4 years ago now that I began to understand what that really meant. So can you talk for a bit about how do we balance moving forward but still acknowledging grief and that it doesn't end?
Well, in the beginning, of course, literally within a breath, my life changed. She took her last breath on December 27th, 2014, and I woke up the next morning without a job. I had physically cared for her. So there was a change in my physicality and what I was required to do every day, which was hard because I didn't have a distraction. My husband could go back to work and enter back into his life.
You were a full-time caregiver.
But I was a full-time caregiver at home, and therefore I had no life to go back into. So I think that kind of extended that initial grief for me to figure out where to put my feet and what to do. But But I liken grief to kind of a vine that goes around a tower or a rose, a climbing rose bush. There are beautiful parts of grief and the memory of those that we love, but there are also thorns that kind of grasp and can get into us. And that's what you got to be careful of. And that's where the balance comes. So for me, I grieve every day. I grieve every day. I think of her. There are days I cry. There are days I go to her graveside and I get a little angry that she's not here with me. There are other days where we're sitting around the dining room table telling stories. The famous time when she in the local grocery store, we didn't have her feet hooked into her wheelchair. And so she put her foot out, and as we turned the corner, she took out an entire aisle of green beans. So, we tell stories like that because that's who Courtney was. And she laughed and giggled the whole time she did it. So anybody
she knew what she was doing.
She knew exactly what she was doing. So we share her life. We don't ever not talk about her. And that's one of the tools we use, is that we freely speak about her in our home. There are things that she wore. Her tennis shoes hang on the lamp. Her hat is there. She's still physically present in our home, which helps us. And then we surround ourselves with people that are willing to listen. So you find people that aren't going to break apart every time you talk about the fact that your child died. And that's really important. So you travel with a tribe of people that can handle the big things. You guard yourself against going back to your past habits of numbing the pain. Jerry and I both struggled with addiction in our past, but at the time of her death, we had a full restorative healing of that. And so we had already dealt with that. So we didn't walk backwards. We kept walking forward.
And that's a big problem, right? This tie between grief and addiction and how one can lead to the other.
Well, we don't like to deal with big feelings. Our world is not one that suffers easily or well. We have a pill for it. We have a food for it. We have there's pornography. There's all kinds of addictions that are out there so that we don't feel. And that's the thing about grief. You have to face it head on, and you have to be angry, and you have to be sad, and you have to accept, that your life's not going to change. She's gone. There are times that wave of grief comes and you just sit in it. You take the day, you clear the day, and I'll sit by her grave and I will cry the ugly cry, or I'll plant new flowers, or I'll do something for someone in honor of her. And they don't need to know it's in honor of her. You just do it. And it just celebrates the love that we shared, and it celebrates the dignity of her personhood. And we honor the memory of who she was and who she taught us to be.
Now we'd like to hear from some readers who have read Mary's book. First up is Lynn Howard, a wife, mother, and grandmother who works in bereavement ministry at her parish. Lynn, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You just read this book recently, so what was your initial reaction?
Actually, I loved the book. I couldn't put it down. I actually did it in one sitting. It's so relatable and so touching, and it touched my life in many ways.
And what is maybe your one takeaway from the book? What's something that you're going to carry with you?
Actually, the first paragraph in chapter 1 talks about how we always have things planned out in our lives and our minds, how we think they should be. And it doesn't always work that way. But if we keep the faith and follow through, we know that God is always with us on this journey.
And who would you recommend it to?
I told my daughters I'd want them to read it. I would like my friends at work to read it. Pretty much anybody could read it and understand and learn something from it.
Great. Is there anything you'd like to say to Mary to thank her for writing such a book?
Thank you, Mary. It's been a pleasure to meet you, first of all. And the book is so readable, and I just think you're a wonderful person. And the way you write is easy to understand and makes us all realize that this happens in all of our lives. And I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's always, as an author, such an honor to be able to hear how it touched other people's lives. Because in my own experience, I just think, I wrote it, and I didn't think anybody else would read it. Yeah. So the fact that it was so touching to you, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. So relatable and so full of humor. That was one of my favorite things about Mary's book.
So.
Great. Well, Lynn, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your reaction to Mary's book with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Lynn.
Now we're joined by Kathy Nipper, a Catholic publicist and book aficionado. Kathy, welcome to Booked.
Amy, thank you for having me. Hi, Mary.
Hi,
Amy.
how are you?
It's great to be here.
Well, I'm so excited to hear your thoughts on Mary's book, but let's start with, how did you first get to know Mary?
Well, I have to give my friend Allison Gingras of Reconciled to You all the credit. When I was working with the Daughters of St. Paul and she and I were talking on the phone with some author-related matter, she said, "Do you follow Mary Lenaburg's blog?" And I said, "No, who is she?" And she said, "Just go to the blog right now and read it." And I did, and I was hooked. And I just was touched with how she shared her journey of caring for Courtney and the day-to-day, what that involved for her, and how she had to rely on God and his providence and his strength in caring for Courtney.
As someone who's read so many Catholic books out there, right? You're our little book aficionado. What makes Mary's book stand out among many of the Catholic books that are out there?
Well, for me, what drew me to Mary, first of all, was her kindness, her caring, her love, her capacity for love, and her honesty in this book is just amazing. And see, I just have a few little Post-it notes of where I highlighted, or I should say where I didn't highlight, because there's more highlight than there is not highlight. And the brutal honesty in this book is what makes it stand out for me. And I learned a lot about Mary I didn't know, and her journey in her marriage, and how they came out of that pain with God's mercy and forgiveness, and now how they're journeying together in faith and sharing their faith with others. And if you're not following Mary and the Grouchy Historian on Instagram, you're missing a lot. You need to follow it, people.
All right, that's great advice, Kathy. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on Mary's book with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Take care.
We are now joined by Christy Wilkins, a wife and mother of 6. Her youngest son, Oscar, has special needs, and she has followed Mary's journey for a number of years. Christy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
And a special welcome to Oscar, very special guest you have with you today. Tell us how you got to know Mary and her story.
Sure. I think that originally I found Mary's blog through Elizabeth Foss's blog. And so I had followed her journey and her family's journey with Courtney, but I was just so touched by the openness and the genuineness of her writing, and especially really moved as she was describing Courtney's passing. And Courtney died in December 2014, and Oscar was born in December 2015. And at the time he was born, we didn't know that he had any special needs or anything going on with him. That didn't happen until he was about 5 months old. But from that point forward, his journey and Courtney's actually had a lot of similarities. And so I found myself going back to Mary's earlier blogs about her life with Courtney. And it kind of unfolded from there. I sent her an email at one point, just kind of introducing myself and introducing Oscar and asking her to pray for us.
And then how has knowing Mary's story really kind of changed your life? Because I know a number of things have happened in the years since you've had Oscar and went back and read Mary's early blog posts.
As we were dealing with all of his diagnoses, and it was kind of like the snowball effect of things that just kept going more and more wrong. And we did end up taking the very same pilgrimage that Mary and Jerry took with Courtney. And about a month before we left on that pilgrimage, I got to meet Mary in person at a Blessed Is She retreat. And I remember it very well. Mary, I don't know if you remember that.
I remember it like it was yesterday. I do.
You after your talk and ugly cried all over your shoulder.
Beautiful.
Because it was such a really profound moment for me. I was in a very dark place with my faith. I was suffering a lot, trying to understand what God was doing in our lives. And so hearing Mary speak about everything that God had done in their lives, and especially seeing someone who was on the other side of everything that I was going through, so generous and open with your heart. And it really helps so many people to know that it's possible to live through something really hard and survive and even come out stronger for it.
Thank you, friend.
All right. Thank you, Christy. Bye, Oscar.
Bye, Oscar.
Next up, we're joined by Catherine Whitaker, a wife and mother, and an author of the newly released book, Live Big, Love Bigger. Catherine, thank you for joining us.
Of course, it's awesome to be here.
So why do you think we need a book like Mary's book at this time?
Well, Mary talks about things that nobody else is talking about, and she talks about them in a really beautiful way because Mary takes you deep and she talks about things. And I don't think it's too much. So sometimes people have like an oversharing capability. I just think in a world where we talk about fluffy, filtered things on social media, that it's really important to have someone who talks about real things that we're really talking about and talks about them in a way that brings Christ into the picture. It's awesome.
How about you personally? How did the book challenge you maybe spiritually or just impact your faith journey while you were reading it?
I think I recognized the intrinsic, amazing dignity of everyone's lives. And I don't think that I understood fully how you could love someone so fully and so faithfully as Mary loved Courtney until I read that book. And it completely changed my perspective on parents who have children who have special needs and how they love them just as much as I love my children who are able-bodied, and that they miss them just as much as if my children weren't here. So that was eye-opening for me and really opened up a new part of my heart that I was unaware existed. Boy, does it open parts of your heart that God has stowed in there. You just have to find a way to open them. And Mary did a beautiful job. Thank you.
That is beautifully said. Thank you so much for joining us today, Catherine. I loved hearing your response to Mary's book.
Of course, it was awesome to be here.
It's such a beautiful message of hope. And I know many people are going to benefit greatly from reading your book, Mary. Thank you so much for very bravely sharing with us how you were brave and the scared.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
And thank you to all of our viewers for watching. Until next time, happy reading.
Someone who's used media a lot in evangelization, so I believe in the importance of Catholic radio, Catholic TV, Catholics using the new media. Can I encourage everyone to watch Shalom TV? I think it's a great vehicle of evangelization. And God bless all of you.